Hello. Welcome to our session today. For our session, we'll be focusing on how AI can be harnessed for social good and what's possible. My name is Jen Louie. I currently work at Harvard University, and I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Rish Mawasi, who's a learning scientist and author and educator and designer with interdisciplinary expertise in learning technology and design. Dr. Mawasi is the founder and director of Co-Design, an interactive learning research group. And in her research, she focuses on the critical and ethical exploration of technologies such as AI, digital media, the role of technology in society, and learners' interactive engagement. Dr. Mawasi completed her PhD in Learning, Literacies, and Technologies at Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. Peter Pollack is a research-based designer who produces graphical and interactive digital media. His research and artwork has addressed political imaginaries, theories, and social practices that people use to make sense of AI, with a focus on grassroots organizing against its impact in law enforcement. He received a PhD in information studies from the University of California, Los Angeles, and an MS in computer science from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Nyaling Murusi is a senior researcher at Distributed Artificial Intelligence Research Institute. Her interests are in understanding how we can build models which center populations often regarded as peripheral. Before DARE, she was a research software engineer at Google, a senior researcher at the South African Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, where she worked closely with government and academic institutions to develop a diversity of products for private and public institutions. And outside of formal work, she is involved in efforts to democratize AI. She's a founding member of the Deep Learning Indaba, the largest machine learning consortium of AI ML practitioners in Africa, and is a member of the A+ Alliance, which is an international coalition that seeks not only to detect, but to correct gender bias in artificial intelligence. So Nyaling, I'll start with you. Your career has focused on AI, ethics, and public good with a really diverse breadth. I'm really curious about your hot take that we discussed, that lots of people in governments don't quite understand how little the tech industry knows about us, relating especially to citizens and their processes in their countries. But they also don't fully appreciate how much can still be achieved with the partial information or knowledge. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on this. What do you see as achievable with partial knowledge that you want to impress upon this group?
Thanks so much. And thanks for the organizers. Thanks for that lovely introduction, Jen. So I think it's a question of scale. It's a matter of scale. So I think we now are in this world of generative AI, where we're looking to be building big representations of us, whether it's where we live or it's our language or it's our food, whatever it is, we're looking to really represent ourselves in these systems. But in order for these systems to actually do that for the diversity of the world, it's going to require a lot of data, which a lot of these companies do not have. And it would be incredible to be able to collect all of that. It would be a lot of work, which actually I don't even know if it would be that useful, which brings me to the second part, which is there's still a lot that you can do with the data that you have. So I think one of the things we miss out on is how we can focus on specific interests, because we don't want AI necessarily in every part of our life, but the parts that we're interested in, this is where I think we can really dial all of our resources and really optimize on the data that we have, collect a little bit more, and build those kinds of models at that scale. And we don't have to have these models that do everything, even in that pipeline, because there's human beings and all of that. We just need them to execute certain parts of what we need to do. So, for example, to find us approximate solutions, and then once we have approximate solutions, we should be able to do less, because we are almost there.
Great, thanks so much. I'm going to jump to Arish. I'm curious about your experience as an educator, and especially your multidisciplinary approach. I took a look at your paper on Frankenstein transmedia, for example, but I'm curious about how would you approach the how we might need to learn or unlearn with respects to AI in this moment? What advice do you have that you might want to offer the next generation who's trying to navigate learning in this space?
I actually, looked at the question, and I was thinking about the fact that unlearning is also a form of learning, where we're exploring now different patterns around AI, but also we are trying to learn where we can use it, how we can use it, and think of its implications on us in different places and spaces in terms of if and how it does generate biases about our communities or represent our communities in a certain way, or we would like it to represent our communities in a certain way. Now, in relation to the transmedia project around Frankenstein, the whole idea around the transmedia is the idea that our engagement with technologies happen across multiple mediums. And I do think this invites us also to look at the different modalities in which now AI is used through. Like we're not just communicating now with AI tools just through text or through visuals. It's multimodal. A second part of this project, the whole idea around Frankenstein was really thinking about ethics and the intended and unintended consequences of innovations. And this is kind of a place also where we think about the ethical consequences of AI in our societies and our communities. But also here I want to raise a point where I invite us to think beyond the framework of consequences and responsible innovation, to also think about what kind of relations are we building as we're communicating with AI, and as we're using AI in different specific contexts, as Milad just raised. It also invites us, I think, to think like expanding the ethical framing also is an invitation for us to think about what kind of aesthetics and design and representations we want these tools to have about our communities and ourselves as we're using it. Other things around this that comes to mind when I think about ethics and the Frankenstein, also the ideas around how we're conceptualizing things like privacy and safety and fairness and harm and doing no harm, and like by whom these definitions are constructed. So I think as part of our learning and unlearning of AI and of these constructs, I think we have responsibility to also think when those terms apply to us, and also how we can reshape the definitions of these constructs. I will pause here for now, and
That's great. Thinking beyond is something that you do as well, Peter, looking at your work on political imaginaries, and also your 2020 paper on beyond algorithmic reformism. You theorize that the consequences are informed by design constraints. I wonder if you can elaborate on that, but also how do you see us moving beyond this at this time, especially given the war?
Yeah, thank you. So this concept of algorithmic reformism is something that was developed out of doing organizing against police surveillance technology, especially in Los Angeles. And the problem that we faced there is when we raised very concrete problems about the biases or the discriminations of these systems, then even if the police would give up on those systems, even if we would cancel them, then they would just use a new system in the place of that old one. So what you see here is that even if we're able to critique specific logic in an algorithmic system, that system can just be replaced with another one, which maybe sounds better, maybe it doesn't use the same logic, maybe it doesn't even have biases as we know of them before, but it's replaced and basically achieves the same things. And what we can do instead of looking at the logic is to try to take a step back and address, of course, the social political context that these systems are made in. And that's something that's really important in organizing work. And looking beyond, I think what's already been addressed is super important. I think looking at specific, if we want to think about more speculative things that we could make, not so much on the critical side, thinking more about bespoke approaches to making technology. Maybe even technology that we might think of as mundane could be more safe, instead of thinking about these grand scaling speculative solutions that soak up a lot of venture capital as we know of AI normally, thinking more about very specific tools that can be useful to people, and focusing also on open source methods and encrypted methods. So that touches a little bit both of those sides, but yeah, would also just echo what's been said in terms of the importance of creating a new type of computational pedagogy, like a new type of curriculum for thinking about like the whole stack of computation, not just the data by itself.
Well, that gets me to my next question. Thinking in a futurism kind of scale, imagine it's now 50 years from now. If we're using AI correctly, if we're implementing all of these solutions, like what does the future look like in a relationship to AI? And then also, what do you think is impairing our ability to get there presently? I'll start with you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. So it's really, really difficult to think, of course, as we know, 50 years down the line, even 5 years down the line. I saw some developers on the internet doing some kind of live stream, and they were joking about that they're so scared of being put in a position where they have to think speculatively 5 years down the line. Because when it comes to things like AI, for example, we really don't know exactly what's going to happen. Some predictions that we might have had 5 years ago are no longer relevant. A little bit of a cop-out answer, but if we can think about how we might want to push things with computational technology, I think what has already been addressed is important, thinking about more mundane, specific tools that people can use, open source tools, and more decentralized tools that aren't based on skill. They're not based on trying to accumulate as much data as possible and have maximum coverage of everything, but tools that somebody can pick up to use to maybe do their own investigation of a situation that's affecting them personally. And I think that a part of this is also trying to create a world, and this is something that's said already too, where maybe we don't have to depend on these technologies in every single circumstance. Maybe we resist the way that they can infiltrate every aspect of life, and we create a situation where there are tools that can be useful for very specific things, but our dependency on them is not so substantial. And this would require us to have maybe like a deflationary view of these tools, where we don't imagine them as these grand technological machines that have these wild ambitions. There's new claims every day from tech companies about how they can make these tools do new things, and then we see, first of all, that this is a little bit smoke and mirrors. It's maybe they just take ChatGPT and wrap it inside of something else, and then say that it can do more and more. And also, we see how these tools slide into terrible applications, how they get used in other ways that are absolutely harmful. And this is a part of the feature creep that just happens in the process of developing technology, but it's also a function of where the money is coming from into these technologies, and also how much power they have, the kind of power asymmetries that they create. So those are all things to consider.
Yeah, I'm going to move to you, Nialing, because you've worked in big tech. You probably have seen how this works also in government, these very large investments that Peter speaks to. Do you agree with this kind of bespoke vision for that he's applied, or do you have a very different vision for what you might see in 50 years from now?
I do agree with a lot of what Peter said, actually. And probably, yes, influenced by like both sides of the equation. I think it's actually really hard for me to be speculative. And I think sometimes it's hard to be speculative because there's so much distractions. We're so distracted by what like the tech companies are always selling us and telling us and all of that. But perhaps I actually do love this technology. And I think one of the things I would love to see is for this technology to go back to it being the tool, and we being the people who decide on the direction and the space where this technology plugs in, and not the other way around. Because it feels like right now we are the ones being expected to plug into the tool. But I would ideally love us to go back and think, what is this thing? What do we want this thing to do for us? And then apply this technology for that. And I think if we can do that, we will start to separate out some of the really poor usages of the technology poor because the technology is being misused, or because the technology cannot actually execute on this big promise, the smoke and mirrors that Peter talked about. So I think if we can go back to modular, if we can go back to proper definition of each one of these things like this, so for example, one of my favorite applications of this technology is in the physical sciences, or like biological sciences. For example, you have a whole pipeline, like biologists will have a whole pipeline where, let's say, they're trying to discover an interaction between two systems, two molecules. And they will draw out this whole thing, and there'll be a whole setup of experiments about the potential of this molecule interacting with that one, and so on and so forth. And then they start to do, because based just on like scientific rules of like, this is stable, this is a stable combination, this is not, this is a stable folding, this is not, and all of that. They start to cut down the space, and then from there, then they can go to the lab and they can verify. And in that kind of an application, you see the tool. So the people have an agenda that they want to execute, and then the tool comes in and they utilize the tools for what the tool can do. And then they move on to do the things that the scientists or the wet lab and all of these other spaces can do. So my hopeful future is for us to have better definitions of what this tool is, what this tool can do, and utilize the tool a little bit better for what we can do. Always centering the people, always centering the solutions that already exist on the ground, because a lot of the solution already exists on the ground. We should not be having, like today, I went out and I got coffee. I'm at a conference and I go get coffee, and you have just like this thing that you type in. You don't talk to the barista at all. You just interact with this system. And I'm thinking, one of the most common things for people who drink coffee is your barista and your barista knows you if you keep going to the same place. But I've never talked to the barista down the street. I mean, we talk to them, but then like they point us to the system, and it's so isolating. And so my dream for the technology, like I said, is that we use it for what it's supposed to be. We don't need more isolation. We just need this thing to actually ease the things that are really boring and monotonous or like difficult to search through. So that's my dream for the technology. It'd also be lovely if people stop lying a lot about what this thing can do and can't do, or like cop out and say AI did it. That would be great.
That's a good point. Arish, how do you envision the future? What do you think needs to be invested in presently? I think you're muted. Oh. Arish, can you turn your volume up a little?
Okay, so yeah, I said that I would like to echo what my colleagues started talking about with respect to the challenge between speculating this far about the technology, at the same time the tension that comes with to what extent do we really want it to be more and more embedded in our lives, and so on. So in one hand, I do think that AI is already embedded in both explicit and implicit ways in our lives, in different applications and different technologies that we're using, even like in research and with examples that already been shared. At the same time, I do think for the future, I would expect, at least in education, for example, to have to see these tools as collaborators in everyday life, in classrooms and so on, but without impacting the humanistic interaction and the relationship building that is happening when learners and when students and learners and teachers and educators and families as well are engaged in a learning space. So I would also expect, or I would hope for these technologies to be also used for certain or specific types of activities where also people have more of choice and autonomy when to use it and how to use it, and with complete awareness also for how their data is being used and what kind of data they are sharing. Again, also part of my challenge was the speculating this far is also the rapid development that we've seen in the past 2 years in particular, even though like AI in education at least has been for years through different systems. But at the same time, we've seen the capabilities of we are seeing now the capabilities of technologies like generative AI in terms of its level of communication, how it can be in different types of activities, can sound like a human, like when it comes to certain types of communications. But also this comes with different challenges. So for example, when I think about using AI in education, for example, education is a complex context. It embodies in it different social, cultural, political, historical dynamics that comes at play when AI is used there. So this offers us complex context for using AI than using it for a very specific task, for example, say in a specific experiment that a scientist or a researcher is using it. And we've seen this in different contexts in a previous research that we've been engaged in, such as, for example, how people collaborating is diverse, like diverse across different cultures. Also reaching a good type of collaborative engagement that reaches deeper or deep learning is also something that requires the students to have different practices and different norms of developing different norms for engagement. And I suspect still like we're not there in terms of the capabilities of AI to support students to reach that level of communication and to do good collaborative learning. And part of that is really the importance of the relationality aspect that we need as a human beings. And really like I will close with also like wondering about the fact that are we designing tools that make us more isolated, or do we want these tools actually to be just tools that we have more of self-determination when to use them and how to use them? So.
I really love that sentiment. Thank you. I'm wondering then, keeping humanity at the center of this, how it is that we relate to one another, who do you think is doing this right presently? Like, who are the types of people, the individuals, or the types of technologies, apart from your own, because all of you are doing amazing work, but who else do you think we should be paying attention to? Who do you think is really forging the way for the future that you want to see and that you recommend that we follow? I'll start with you, Nailing.
Wow. I don't think I have specific answers. I have more of the general groups. So there are very many groups that I know of who are doing this kind of work, where they, first of all, you start from the people and what the people need. And a lot of the time, the work that's being done actually comes from, it's motivated because people are building within their communities. I think that's one of the best things to actually do this, because once you are building within your own community, it is because you're building because you have identified a certain specific kind of question that need to be answered. So some of these, of course, I'm very familiar with the consortiums inside Africa, the Data Science Africa. There's a big lab at Makerere University, which I am a huge fan of. So one of the things that they do is they build like systems to detect the air quality, and for example in Kampala, but like this system now works in several other African countries. I know of like a group of women who build this company of they were concerned with gender-based violence. It's a group of women in Argentina. They're called Amor AI. And they build so incredibly different, because one of the first thing is we are building for a very sensitive group of people. We are building for people who have been victimized by intimate partners, but also sometimes by the state, by the police, by the court system. And they're building this system in order to be able to say, okay, there were so many points of intervention here that could have happened, but the courts failed us, the system failed us here, and these are some of the things that we need to look into. And one of the things that I love about, for example, how they build, they decided they're not gonna go for as much accuracy as they could have had, because in order for them to be incredibly accurate, they would have had to build on the cloud. They would have had to put in on AWS or Google Cloud, or they would have had to use some of these pre-trained models that come from the outside. But one of their biggest things for them was that they wanted to preserve privacy and confidentiality and keep this kinds of information as internal as possible. And so there you see, like, you're building an AI system, but it is just surrounded, like, the greatest boundaries about this is the protection of the people for whom they build for. So, there are some of these groups that, like, you see, and I mean, these are people who were in their communities and they were watching something. If they were reading newspapers or watching the news, they were hearing from their neighbors, they were observing, they were seeing in their homes, and they were like, I absolutely need to change this. Right? Who is going to build a system such as this? If you have somebody external to come and build a system such as this, right? Lots of tech companies are doing the AI for social good, right? But where is that data going to live if Google comes in and is going to be building the AI for social good for this group of very sensitive application, very victimized people who are very vulnerable? That kind of building happens very differently. The amount of resources where you put the majority of the resource is different. So for them, the way they scale is they go to court, court to court to court. And each one of these systems are just built locally with the people they know and the people they trust. It's obviously a lot of work, like, also to scale like that. But the thing is always, what is the aim of the task? Like, what is the most important thing here? And so they had decided that the most important thing is to build this system for these people. It's exactly the same thing with the ideas of, like, that lab in Kampala. Who was going to be building a system to measure the air quality in Kampala, in Uganda, right? For the everyday Ugandan, right? They had to go in and build it. It doesn't make business sense, right? And because a lot of big tech is gonna be driven by business sense. If it doesn't make business sense, it's not gonna be built. But like I said, it goes beyond it making business sense. For a system to truly be functional, it has to be impactful on the ground. And I really think some of these systems, when they're built like this, centering the people, centering the real question, being built by people who really know the operational environment of these systems, then you actually get systems that are operational, that are functional, that are useful.
Oh, I really love that. I think there's always been this question around who has the right proximity to these problems. Peter, I'm going to turn this to you as well, because so much of what you do is also really based in community. It has a certain level of bespokeness and central to, thinking about those dynamics at a local level. Who do you think is making the right investments now? What do you think that we should be paying more attention to, or any other types of technologies that really delight you at this moment that you see as really forging the future?
So what's closest to me is mapping these systems. It tends to be looking at these systems and developing maps in communities that look at how these systems intersect with how people are actually living. I'm not too directly working with AI in the work that we're doing, for example, at Forensic Architecture. We do open source investigations. We're covering a lot of the atrocities that Israel's committing right now in Gaza, and this work looks like AI a lot of times, but actually behind the scenes, it's a lot of really manual interpretation. So I think that what is promising for me in AI is developing specific tools that can respond to specific research questions, and these research questions may be also related to critiques of AI systems. We might be trying to understand how an AI system is used for targeting people as it is used in Gaza. So for me, what's inspiring is not so much developing large models that could be used by many people, but small teams coming together to develop, again, bespoke solutions to specific problems. But beyond that, thinking technologically, what is promising, again, we have to be thinking about the full stack, not really just the models that we're developing, not just the interface level, but how people are actually interacting with these devices how people are interacting with these models on their devices and through computers. So one thing that's promising, for example, is thinking about computations that happen, machine learning computations that happen on your own device. So this is a type of research that's looking to see how can we actually run machine learning, not so much on the cloud, but on your own device. So thinking about how we can break up the pipeline of data inference in a modular way so that it can be more secure. Because as we know, anytime that we want to process our data with a machine learning model, if that goes to the cloud, that's going into somebody else's domain, and then they have access to it. And what we find ourselves in is a situation where if we want to develop these technologies, work with these technologies, even in a simple way, usually we're beholden to the people that make them. So looking towards these solutions these technological solutions that are trying to break up the pipeline so that there is technical infrastructure, devices, computers that can run these inferences without us having to depend on these large third parties.
Yeah, that's great. Arish, what is your answer to this?
So I've been thinking a lot about how important it is to build infrastructures for AI education and AI literacies for diverse populations, and also working with diverse people and diverse stakeholders, in the sense that, for example, drawing on previous work I've done within the national AI, NSF National AI Institute for Student AI Teaming at the University of CU Boulder. One thing, or some efforts that have been done there were around collaborating with the teachers and with youth, both to design collaboratively learning materials and educational materials around AI in education. That was one part, and it goes beyond simply learning about how AI works or what machine learning is, towards really thinking about the social, cultural, political implications of AI in the everyday life of diverse communities and diverse group of people. But also does not stop there. There were different groups within the institute. An example of that, the work of my colleague Michael Chang, who did collaborative design work with youth to design collaborative assistant, basically, or to envision or to re-envision what collaborative learning with AI could be. And in one hand, like, these spaces offered learning about AI, but also involved people like teachers, like young learners who often are not part of the technology ecosystem development, and the process of thinking about these tools design and at the same time developing AI literacies. That's one example of building such infrastructure. In addition to that, for example, I've been exposed to work that colleagues at Arizona State University, such as Professor Punya Mishra, is doing around the creativity and usage of ChatGPT for creative purposes with teachers and educators, than really excluding it because of anxieties or fear from using it. So their approach has been inviting this generative AI into the educational space, and also preparing teachers and the students for its usage. So yeah.
Great, thanks. We have from the audience some hope that there might be some more examples that you have, especially of like AI tools that may not be at the latest frontier of things. So not necessarily the ChatGPTs of the world, but things that maybe aren't even in the latest versions of, but are just really great functionalities, like just things that you really admire. So also we'll put that out to the audience as well. If you have examples of that, please put that in the chat. I think it'd be great to share. There's a concern that has been raised around if we use things such as GPT-4, if we use the vision functions, what are we sacrificing privacy-wise? And what other types of sacrifices might we be making in order to kind of use these applications for social good? Like, what are some of the trade-offs that we might need to consider? And yeah, wondering if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so okay, I'll say that absolutely, if you're using any of these models, GPT-4, if you're using it through any kind of service where you go to the internet and then you can type things in, interact with it, then that is provided by a company that will in some way have access to your data. So you are essentially foregoing your privacy. Of course, in that case, you have to weigh how serious the damage would be to you based on giving up your privacy in this case. And for a lot of us working in these areas, working on Gaza, that is pretty serious. So we have to be cautious about that. And this is exactly what I'm saying about, we're having to forego our privacy in order to use these tools, use these functionalities. Another risk of these tools in the long term, not just to our personal information, is that as we depend on them more and more, they are motivated by their own motives, by their own incentives for profit and whatever else. And that means that at any time they can just turn off the switch, they can turn off the tap, they can block us or do anything like this. So if we depend on them in our workflow, if we depend on them for the work that we're doing, at any time, if we're beholden to them, they could just turn that off and then we don't have access to it anymore. That's what we see, of course, right now with Twitter. Ever since Elon Musk's takeover of it, it's much more difficult to use that for open source investigations. Same with Facebook. And yeah, just to say finally that the name OpenAI is just a complete misnomer. It's a way of branding it to start to stir up venture capital to get people interested in this like ethical approach to AI. But it's a big tech company as anything else.
I want to echo what Peter said and also emphasize that we're also at a stage where the nature of generative AI is still in the phase of we're still exploring what's going on and the capabilities of generative AI and how to what extent it is really in one hand creative and imaginative and so on, but also we know already different examples of harms that it may lead to, including privacy issues, but also at the same time some practices that are very important to take into consideration when using it is also hiding different private information that we're sharing with it. To what extent, such as names, such as ID numbers or date of birth, and so on. And this leads me to also raise the ethical questions around how to use it for research when especially for those of us who are in the social sciences, working with participants and the human beings. I think it is our responsibility to make sure that there are regulations around ethical regulations around protecting participants in our research, and really having an open conversation and transparent conversation about usage of such tools in research. And this is also an invitation, of course, to different academic institutions to think about how, and I'm sure like different organizations are already talking about this, to think about what kind of regulations we need to protect participants in research we conduct. At the same time, I want to provide like practical examples where AI can be used both like for research purposes, in terms of like the space that things like, or research questions that we can raise around AI as a phenomenon, and also using AI for different as a tool for analysis. One example can be really if we want to check or study different phenomena related to AI, we can start looking at different patterns and how, for example, what kind of content it is giving us, or like the outputs that it is generating in terms of what kind of biases it is reproducing, what kind of ideologies it is representing. It can be around what kind of communication it is adaptive to more than others. For example, does it speak when does it speak politely, when it does not? So there are different spaces to raise many questions that I'm sure many people in social sciences would be interested in exploring through that platform, which reminds us of different also questions or research questions and the studies that have been conducted about Facebook and social media and Twitter and so on. That's one space. Another space is also if we have data that is not really, or data that does not involve human beings, I think ChatGPT or other tools can be also useful as an assistant to think with us about how we are analyzing data. A third space also is for those who are in computer science. I'm sure many colleagues are using it for generating different codes. So there are different uses that are beneficial to us in research, and of course, the classic example is also editing different types of texts. But also, I'm personally at a stage where I care a lot about privacy and intellectual property, so it depends. Like I won't trust it for everything, and also the concept here of a trust in itself, we can talk hours and hours about when to trust it, how to trust it. And in the example that Peter mentioned about data around Gaza, do we really want to trust technologies that we don't know where our data goes to? Do we really want to use it and share data, random data with it? This comes also with research and our research responsibility as well as social scientists. I don't want to share with generative AI data that I'm responsible for in my research. So yeah, that's all.
Sure. I think you bring up so many great points about who do we then trust that with? Who is actually then accountable on the other side of it? Ultimately we're trusting a company, but also then who's ultimately at the helm makes a huge difference. Nyling, what do you have to share on this topic?
Yeah. So actually, you see, I think, yes, from the background, being in these companies, but then also being from where I come from, I see there's this like disjunction, right? Where we're caught in a little bit of a catch-22 when it comes to this sort of thing. On one hand, we have these systems that supposedly work for us, but get us so wrong. So maybe this is where like my very first comment came from. That they don't know us, they don't know our language, they don't know our culture, they don't know what we prioritize. They really don't know very much about us. And so I think there is sometimes this little thing where you're like, I want this thing to work for me. I want it to work for my people, right? I need it to also like, I need Google Maps to give me proper directions in my own hometown. I need ChatGPT to not say my language in such broken format or to disrespect my elders, right? There are cultural ways of how we speak. I don't want ChatGPT shouting at my father. So maybe I want to teach it how to speak in proper ways. And so it's like you have this part of you that's like left out. And then if you do engage, And so there's so many programs that like people are running. Like one of the big one that's like really running right now is like the World Dishes or something like that. But it's where researchers are collecting what people eat the world over, because these systems don't know what we eat, what people eat the world over, to improve representation of food culture. So that, you know, food is not just French and Italian and maybe Mexican or something like that, or Thai and Indian, but like, you know, there's Laotian food, right? There's food from Togo. There's food from everywhere. And so people are really building these data sets. And then I wonder, we're going around, we're collecting our information, we're asking our aunties, we're asking our moms and grandmothers to give us this incredibly valuable information. And it's especially valuable because it's not on the internet. So the internet war we've lost, right? And now we're going extra to go extract this information out of our homes to feed to these systems. And after we feed to these systems, best case scenario, right? We'll get better. We'll get really good at our things, right? Best case scenario, they're going to get really good at our things. And then after they get really good at our things, what's going to happen? Because we have just improved a system that we have no ownership of. And this, like I said, best case scenario, like we might also be sharing all of this information of like where we live and what we do, only to improve surveillance of ourselves. Because we don't own any of these systems. And so by improving the systems, and honestly, we know this is how OpenAI has been building the technology, right? We interact with the technology. If we think back to like GPT-2 or 3, this technology was not very usable, but it interacted with us, and now it's so much better. And so we're going to go and we're going to build this system. And once again, best case scenario, the system will come back and we will be sold this system that we have bought. And because we do not own any of it, we're not going to be able to decide the charges for the system. So, so as Peter said, we'll have two choices. We go off the platform and have to absolutely rebuild from scratch because they were such an integral part of our system. Or we go on and we pay these exorbitant prices. And for people who come from like the global majority, we know about when we have had a good that then gets exported, and then that good comes back to us, and it is exorbitantly expensive. And so this is the thing that we kind of have. And so for me, I just think, this is my motto: look internal, focus internal, build internal, look internal. I think about what can I get with like just in, like, because as much as maybe we might lose against the forces of big tech, because it's not just big tech, it's government, it's international NGOs, it's international governance systems, and you see who is sitting on any of these boards, right? Like big tech is sitting on boards at the UN, they're sitting on boards and so many places, right? And so their agenda is going to always be very loud and very visible. And so I just think, like, for me, it's like, okay, what can we build so that if we do have to deplatform, we don't have like so far low to go. We have a little bit of a softer landing. And this is not at all even get to, like I said, best case scenario. We're not talking about surveillance. We're not talking about privacy. We're not talking about extortion and exploitation and all of the other things that come with this. It's just a thing about like the centralization of power and what do we remain? What do we own at the end, right? Like we are the custodian of the knowledge. But then afterwards, if we put it into the machinery, what do we come out with? What do we own?
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting is so much of why people accuse tech companies of a neo-colonialist framework, right? Ultimately, you can give access, but if you don't give ownership, authority, agency, it's not the same. I'm going to have us leave off in our last 5 minutes on hopefully a hopeful note. Like I'm curious about like the closing. What is the thing that gives you hope around AI as we move forward? And what would you advise us to think about, or a question that you would like to leave us with that you think that we should really evaluate more, hopefully for the future? I'll start with you, Peter.
Well, this closing narrative that we just had, I think, it sounds very like dystopian if we think about it like that, but it's actually that's the kind of way of thinking that gives me hope, right? Thinking really critically about these issues, pushing the discourse beyond bias, pushing the discourse beyond even capitalism, which we know is bad. It's bad for us, but we have to go beyond that to acknowledge what are the power asymmetries that are there, even if we're working under a different economic system. So, I mean, to me, just developing the literacy about these issues, developing like practical, like working communities that can develop these things, that are thinking differently about how to develop them, that don't just want to, plug into existing ecosystems, that want to think about how to do that differently. That to me is the most inspiring thing. Yeah.
That's great. Arish, what do you have for us?
So one thing that comes to mind here is that even like thinking about this utopian aspect of it in itself is part of the pedagogical part of it working around the literacies with people, especially now, like if we look learning from social media platforms as a phenomena, invite us to think with people that we work with around all these critical issues of privacy, of harm, of ownership around their data, or their self-determination as individuals around data, but also their collective self-determination around data ownership and so on. And that in itself give me hope, because I feel like we're in a different place with our awareness about what technology platforms are doing to us as people and to our communities, that I think with this awareness also comes the expansive ways now people and also technology field now they're expanding, or I want to be hopeful that expanding to think about the social, cultural, political than only technology as a way of getting richer and richer and richer financially and economically. So I want to be hopeful with that regard, especially that I like working with youth, working with teachers. I do know that they, in many ways, like technology tools comes to their spaces. In one hand, yes, as a tool to create with and be creative with, but also it's not. I'm very hopeful that it's not the center of people engagement with the world, and the relationality aspect that comes in when we engage with technologies. It is still, I believe, alive. And it's alive in the way that I hear a lot around from teachers and youth when they think about technologies, not only AI in particular, but in general. They talk about emotions. They talk about relationship building. They talk about trust, not only with the technology itself, but also among themselves as a group. And this, to me, creates a humanistic thinking of our engagement with technologies. And it is in itself, when thinking about design of technology, it invites us really to decolonize the approaches and the design of technologies, where we're centering the humanistic part of us as humans. So, yeah.
Yaling, please close us out.
Yeah, looking more brighter. Like I said, I love this technology. I think it's very useful. I think one of the ways to really move forward is to realize that we are all capable of building it. We're not going to build ChatGPT. We don't need to build ChatGPT, but we are capable of building the tools that we need for the problems that we see. And I think more importantly is to always remember that we are the final evaluators of what is good, because the technology should serve us. And if the technology does not serve us and it doesn't do what we desire, we have a right to go build the technology that we desire, that does what we need. And there's so much that we can do with the smallest system. A couple of years ago, we ran a whole election analysis with a bunch of laptops for the South African Broadcasting Corporation. We did. It was a bunch of laptops in the background, just running background. We didn't have so much compute, but we were the go-to people of analyzing where the trends, where the conversation, what was going on in the country. We were live 24/7 with a bunch of laptops. And I think if we just look at that, just let go of the noise, and we just focused on what's important. And it's a tool like any other tool. I think we need to remove the magic. And it's when you remove the magic that I think the true magic comes, like the true possibilities come. So I really hope to see more uses of this technology for people, where the technology does exactly what it's supposed to do.
I love that image. I love just the idea that basically people are being mobilized. Our technologies in many ways can facilitate, especially at a local level, that we may not need huge investments to essentially make change. Thank you all so much for your time, and it's been an absolute joy to have you. And we'll be in touch. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.